You say, mind your own business. My name, my brand. But it is my business. I'm not lending a hand. For fun or my health. I'm here, like it or not. I'd assume the former since you signed a contract. Oh, hold on now. We just made an agreement. Surmising the bottom line's numerical achievement. It's my vision I created, my sweat, my grit. The percentage you get is, at this point, a gift. Thank you for your feedback. We value it greatly. Tempers seem to rise when profit flows more freely. Your world is simple, clear, black and white, like a one-way street in matrimonial life. While you enjoy ideas, creations, and dreams, and sit back and dictate from a throne, it seems. Once you've reached success, it's easy to forget how much you needed just getting started. You came to us with sorry, saturated sources, needing to branch out to replenish resources. Competition was high, and you needed new soil, what with your clients finding elsewhere to be loyal. The more we give access to glitter and gold, the more you let us show you a whole new world. You grow more confident as you learn the room, assuming you don't step wrong and go kaboom. Let me cut you off there amidst your preaching, throwing accusations that are quite far-reaching. There is much gratitude, humility, and more, but I've been burnt by middlemen before. A babysitter is a parent on an all-paid-for vacation. Do you love my baby enough to make it your vocation? Even if it never bears anyone's name but mine, can you window shop that for the rest of your life? We all know of endless alternatives spouting up, so is it till death do us part or straight to prenup? You'll say noted, understood, find a way to rephrase, diplomatically make us compromise, liaise, and like a child receiving their consolatory gift, grant us freedom of choice to avoid a rift, hence giving us reputations that persist like a stain. Let's get started now so we clear up our name. Overzealous, fanatic, obsessive to the T. When to say when to the big bad control freak. Thank you.
Thank you everyone so much for coming. I thought in honor of Dominique's efforts, we might all conduct this in rhymed iambic pentameter. I don't think at this point anybody's up to it. So before we begin, here we are at the tail end of Dubai Watch Week. It's my first time attending Dubai Watch Week in Dubai for the entire event, and I think it would be appropriate to take a moment and thank the Siddiqui family for creating such an amazing experience for us here. This is truly unique. There really is nothing like this anywhere on earth in the watch world. It's an opportunity for stakeholders along the entire continuum of the watch world, from manufacturers to retailers to enthusiasts to collectors, to all come together and have these kinds of conversations, which really can't happen on this scale anywhere else yet. There's been some discussion of other trade shows attempting to actually emulate what the Siddiquis have created here, but for now, this is a unique environment, and I think a very precious one, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Jack.
And thank you all for coming. So the thesis of this particular panel discussion is an interesting one. It's called Control Freaks. And the idea is that brands, in general, irrespective of scale, and we'll talk about scale in a little bit, attempt to exert control in various local markets across the globe, depending on how widely they're distributed, to control everything from public relations messaging to visual merchandising, how their brands are presented, what's talked about, what's not, what aspects of the watches are talked about, and what aspects of the watches are not talked about. So control freaks. And I thought the first thing that we would do is sort of test the thesis. You know, I just want to go around and ask our panelists, who come from a broad spectrum of the watch world, to first introduce themselves, and then we'll talk a little bit about whether or not this problem actually exists, or whether or not the issue actually exists, and if it does, the extent to which it's a problem. So, Richard, I thought we'd start with you.
Yes, hello. My name's Richard Stenning. I'm one of the co-directors of a very old, established English watchmaking company called Charles Frodsham. Been in existence for 185 years. We have always been very low-key and very much under the radar. So marketing is not something that we're used to. So I'm as interested in the audience in hearing what my fellow panelists are going to be saying about it. I'm sure it's going to be a great learning experience.
Great. And Max?
So I'm Maximilian Büsser, the creator of MB&F. I've had 3 lives. I was at Jaeger in the prehistoric ages, then Harry Winston, then MB&F. It's clear that 30 years ago when I started in this industry, it was a complete separation of church and state. You had the watch brands creating products, and you had the retailers selling them. And except for a few jewelers who had their own boutiques, watch brands did not have stores. They had no idea how to sell, and it was, here is my product to your retailer, please take care of it any way you want. I've seen over 30 years that change pretty dramatically by the brands trying to take control.
Okay. I'm Hind Siddiqui, Chief Marketing Communication Officer at Siddiqui Holding. I've only been in the industry for 14 years, but I've already seen a lot of change from the first day that I joined the business and how we were interacting with the brands in terms of marketing and events and how it has changed today.
Okay, fantastic.
I'm Patrick Pugnot. I'm the CEO of Ulysse Nardin and Gérard Perregaux. I think the topic is very vivid. It's a very interesting one. We feel it all the time, and as Max said, probably there's been some major changes over the last 20 years. One thing we see today is probably more a sense of partnership between some extremes of brands giving instruction to partners, exchanging, talking to the brand, and probably also bringing some value.
Mm-hmm. So you used the word partnership just now. The experience that all of you have had, and you've all had very different experiences depending on your positions, but does it feel like a partnership, or does it occasionally feel like you're actually dealing with a control freak, so to speak?
I think it's a question of size at both ends. I know most of the big brands have got this wet dream called Louis Vuitton, where basically you go directly to the client and you have nobody in the middle. It seems that's what we're seeing all over the world. And then you've got exceptions, like an incredibly beautiful exception like Rolex or Patek, who say, you are my retail partners, I believe in you, we work hand in hand, and it seems a real partnership. And then you've got small guys who would love to exert pressure but don't have the power to do so. Right. So they just do as best as they can. If I just take our little project, we've only got 25 retailers in the world. Clearly, to sell and present a piece like ours, you need an enormous amount of energy, 100 times more than to sell any of the other brands. So we are grateful to our retail partners who actually take that energy, which they could make tons more money selling other products, to try and educate clients. So we're very much in a grateful state.
Now, Richard, Max is a very small batch maker, an artist and artisan of the watch world. And if it's possible to operate on an even smaller and more artisanal scale, I think it's probably the case that you do it. So Charles Frodsham and Sons, 185 years old. For most of that history, a maker of sea clocks, marine chronometers, mantle clocks, table clocks, manufacturer to the Royal Family of England. And the whole wristwatch thing is a very new thing for Frodsham. So getting the watches out into the world, does your experience more or less parallel Max's, or are you really, absent a retail network of any kind? Are you basically selling directly to your consumers?
I certainly don't have any marketing experience at all. I just simply started as a watchmaker, and as you quite rightly say, artisanal at a very, very low level. That affords a slight luxury in that the clients generally come to you. You don't need, when you're making 10 watches a year, you don't need to go and pump out a marketing strategy for the simple reason that the clientele will come to you. So, unlike Max, we have one retail store in the world, and it is ours. That's it.
Yeah.
It's perhaps a little bit like 300 years ago, if you wanted to go, as a client, wanted to go and buy a watch, you went to Mr. Tompion at the Dial and 3 Crowns, and you bought your watch. 200 years ago, you went to Mr. Breguet in Paris, and you bought your watch. But you then also had the opportunity, if you lived in Constantinople or St. Petersburg, to go through an agent to buy your Breguet watch. By 1900, firms like Patek Philippe, you went to Gondolo in Rio, or you went to Tiffany in New York, because they were the big retailers. Retailing started around that time. Now, in my opinion, we have all of those things happening. You have agents like auction houses selling pieces. You have the best retail stores around the world selling pieces. And you have the manufacturers setting up their own boutiques on every high street in every major city. So be interesting to see what happens in the next 100 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very interesting point. We sort of have a tendency to assume that the way business is done today is the way business has always been done. But to your point and Max's, you go back even 30 years and things were dramatically different. And of course, you go back a century, 2 centuries, and the whole concept of having an agent representing someone like Breguet or someone like Vacheron Constantin in in foreign markets, that was a relatively new concept. Now, Hind, the Siddiqui family started as a single shop and has expanded through the generations to now become the dominant retail network in this part of the world for fine watchmaking. So you've had a chance, and you and your family have had a chance to experience the change in dynamic that Max has been talking about directly, but from the retail side. So I'm curious what your sort of take on this whole issue is.
I mean, besides opening boutiques for the brands and everything, we've been always taking care of marketing for the brands from A to Z. We've been also playing a role of attracting them to come to the Middle East, to create events for the Middle East. 14 years ago, it was very difficult. Their attention was in other markets, and we were neglected. But we knew the potential of our market. So we used to have to convince the brand, guys, there are opportunities in Dubai, come to Dubai. There are events happening, sponsor them, start taking part in them. And some of the brands who trusted us used to allow us to do so. But then when their attention, changed and, Dubai became now in the spotlight, and now they're hungry and they want to come to Dubai and they want to manage everything on their own. They've been wanting to take more control, and it's understandable. However, we know our market better than anyone else. So if they think something can work, that worked in, let's say, Kuwait, and they want to bring it to Dubai, and they assume that it's going to work the same way, it's not going to work. And this is where we play, a role. I wouldn't say a battle, but that's where the debate takes place. Guys, it works in Kuwait, please don't do it in Dubai. You're actually going to offend our clients rather than attract their attention. And some brands listen and trust because we've been doing it for so long, and some don't, And at the same time, they need to understand that we as Ahmed Siddiqui & Sons, we are also a brand. And we are a retailer who cares about our reputation, and we've been doing it for so long. So if we don't like what you're doing, we might not want to do it. So we need to find a way where we meet halfway through, and it works for both the brands, the international brand and us as a retailer.
So if in fact you were to, if you were to actually accede to a brand's pressure to conduct an event that you, in a way that you feel is inappropriate for this market, this could potentially lead to the damaging of your own brand and the damaging of everyone's commercial interests who's involved with you as a retailer.
I mean, I am on a panel called Control Freak, so I am sometimes a control freak, and sometimes I don't invite my clients. If we feel that it's an inappropriate event and it doesn't suit them, we tell them, fine, you don't want to listen to us. I am not going to expose my clients to an event of a certain type. So please, be my guest and do whatever you want, but I'm not going to come.
I'm probably betraying my ignorance of local market, pressures, and admitting to you that it comes as a surprise to me as a naive observer from outside this world that what works in Kuwait could dramatically not work in Dubai.
Forget Kuwait and Dubai. What works in Dubai doesn't work in Abu Dhabi, and that's just like an hour away. So I can't take an event from Dubai and take it to Abu Dhabi, and then you expect it to be the same. In Abu Dhabi, I have to design it completely differently. It's different. It's more challenging. It's still a very closed society over there. So just this notion of no, we did it in Dubai, we can do it in Abu Dhabi. Excuse me, no. And then why are you wasting your budget on something that's not going to work? Like, I'm telling you, please hold on. Let's use that money somewhere else. We'll get something better. We will get the people you want to attract in Abu Dhabi, but in the way that we will advise you to do so. So sometimes the brand learn it the hard way. They'll go and they'll spend money, and then poof,
Yeah.
you know.
Sometimes you have to let people make their own mistakes.
Exactly.
So, and Patrick, as the leader of brands that function within a global group and on a global scale, you know, I'm sure that you've seen this issue play out in different markets globally. So maybe we could, you know, you can shed some light on this issue from your perspective, just in terms of trying to be sensitive to what does and what does not work in different markets.
So, I mean, for both companies, for GR Prego and Ulysse Nardin, we decided we'd be 100% multi-brand. We're going to have only a couple of mono-brand stores, and most of them, the vast majority, are going to be are actually franchise, like it's the case here in Dubai. But what I've noticed also over the last couple of years is the quality of the conversation with the retailers and with the partners, distributors or retailers, has increased significantly. And I think it's mainly due to it works both ways. It takes two to tango. On one hand, the brands that probably listen better. In our case, we know about Freak at Ulysse Nardin. We try not to know too much about Control, but we are. It's the quality of the conversation. We have to listen also to our partners. When we're fortunate to have partners like Sediki or some couple of other watch retailers in the world that are changing our watch retail is now being done compared to what it was 10 years ago, we have to listen. I think as a brand, our duty is to make sure we bring 80% or 90% of the brand platform, the story, the values, the communication, how you see the product. On the other hand, we also have to listen very carefully to local specificities, and some brands have done that actually pretty well, and they've been successful thanks to that. And just make sure we keep the consistency worldwide. But I think the quality of the conversation could make a big difference, and that's what we try to do. And I was referring to the brand duty as bringing product, but it works both ways. I learned so much from listening to our partners about the market expectation, not only local, global. And you know, when you work in a brand, your view of the world is still narrow. Whatever you do, even if you spend time listening to your peers and looking at what the competitors are doing, it's narrow. When your partners, the retailers in particular, they can hear all the stories from all brands, including all the bullshit. And it's great because they can also help you fine-tune your story.
I just want to add, sorry, Jack. I mean, there are some brands who you can't blame for wanting to control a way a retailer is managing, because sometimes some retailers can make mistakes. I mean, not like we Ahmed Siddiqui & Sons, we really invest in our training, in our evolution, and how we do things. So we are showing effort. But I'm sure there are other retailers, and I've heard from brands, you know, where they go and it's a disaster, and there's not a reciprocated effort from the other end. So in that case, yes, of course, a brand has to become a control freak, you know, and they need to take care of things because they're not trusting that retailer, you know, to mirror what they want to achieve. So in that case, it's okay to become and actually you need to become a control freak, but also give them a chance to learn from you. Because if you're just going to control and you're just going to do everything on your own and then say, forget it, they're useless, they're never going to be able to do anything, it's not going to work. You need to teach them. I mean, that's how we've been learning from our brand. So they come, we ask them, okay, guys, send us an event brief. How have you done it before? Show us pictures. We understand, we immerse, we understand where they want to go, and then we tell them, let's localize it and package it in a way that works. This is how we work, but not necessarily all retailers around the world do that. So we don't blame brands who need to control, but they need to trust. For us, they need to trust us. I mean, I think we've shown the world that we can do so much, and we have so many ideas, and we understand our market.
So let's open this.
If I can
sorry,
just-
please.
It's true that the world of retailers has changed a lot. The brands have changed a lot, but retailers have changed a lot. I feel that the economy works in a pretty Darwinian way. If you don't bring value, you disappear. There are virtually no more distributors left in the world because they were not actually bringing value. Today, if a retailer considers it's only geography, meaning I've got that great location and I've got the inventory, he or she is going to disappear.
True.
Because then the brand can just take the same real estate and has got the inventory. And I think retailers have evolved. And we've got the best example here with the Siddiqui family, who have understood that you have to engage, educate, inspire. And the era of the merchants is going to die. Or they will just stay with third, fourth category for tier brands who will be happy to just have merchants sell their product one way or the other. I see a big shift in the next 5 to 10 years of a lot of retailers will disappear or won't be there.
And what's interesting, if I may, it's the size sometimes matters, but not always, meaning some retailers have one store and are able to evolve very rapidly because they're open-minded. They're looking at what's happening in the other industries, not only the watch industry. And it's really interesting to see that widening gap between the ones that are performing and the others. We were discussing it with Mike this morning. For brands, there are very few pool brands, to be honest. And even those brands can change over time. So the ability to learn how to sell and the ability for the brand to support that process is paramount, is crucial in the success of the brand and in the quality of the partnership.
So something else that you mentioned the question of size, and in the beginning, we sort of talked a little bit about the degree to which the scale of a company may or may not determine whether or not it feels it needs to have uniform messaging, uniform presentation across all markets. Is size, leaving everything else aside, sort of a significant determining factor, do we think, in whether or not a brand wants to have very, very uniform messaging and communications practices across all of its markets?
So I would probably answer differently. There was a reference to Vuitton. It's interesting, or to some other mega players. Probably 10 years ago, those brands were actually having a very uniform experience wherever you would go in the world, but they start to understand they needed to differentiate the experience in different stores, different size, and they were bringing some excitement again instead of standardizing everything, which is somehow standardizing is the opposite of luxury. And I think that's where whatever your size is, but keeping that in mind, and that's where the discussion with the people that know the trade, that are in contact with the end consumer. At the end of the day, one of the challenge of our industry when you're a brand and you don't have retail, and you don't own your own retail, you don't very often talk to the end consumer. And that's the big challenge, is how do you get to know them? And it's only by listening to what your partner is saying. And obviously, sometimes, you're fortunate to work with your partner, have some event, and get to know them, understand the retailers. That's why the local flavor, back to your question, the local flavor in everything we do is probably necessary as an ingredient of success.
The other issue is trust.
Yeah.
A lot of brands have abused retailers. A lot of retailers have abused brands. And I see, for example, that where we work the best is where the retailers trust me and actually allow me and my team to speak with their clients. That's where our sales are really great. And those who think, oh my God, he's going to take my client away, don't allow us to interact. And I get it. They've been burned. They're like, oh, I don't want to do this again. But you need two to tango. And too many in this equation have been burnt one from the other.
But you know what's the problem, Max, is that we as retailers, for example, as a family business, we remain consistent. It's the family who's running the business. You know, we have the turnover of our staff is not as much. Like we have people who are working with us for 40 years, so we are consistent. However, today we're seeing the brands their team members are not consistent. Their CEOs are not consistent. So the brands shouldn't, when they when they employ these team members, they shouldn't only train them about the brand, the image, the messages of the brands and all of that, but also who the retailers are and what the retailers have been doing. So you need to give them a full historical background of the relationship, because that newbie can come in and say, I don't care about you. I want to show my muscles and I'm going to do everything on my own. Who are you? What are you doing? I don't care. Because they think that their name is strong enough and they don't need the retailer. And I'm not talking from HQ level, I'm talking more on regional offices levels. So it's important that the brand need to brief their team members, the new people, about who the retailers are and what they've been offering and what they've been doing for the brand in order to build it. Because there's where the problem comes from today.
Do you folks believe that there has been a change in, this is a segue to your last comment, have there been so many shifts and changes in senior leadership at brands and in who's actually in charge? You combine that with the chaos of the global economy, with the unpredictability, the volatility of the economy. To what extent does that make building the kinds of relationships upon which this business really relies, to what extent has that made things more difficult?
It's not very difficult because, you know, most of the talents are recycled amongst different people from the industry. You know, so today you're with the X brand, tomorrow with the Y brand. When they are from the industry, it's not very difficult. It's when they come from a different industry and they're completely new and they know nothing about the industry, but because you know they've been hired for a certain talent, that's where the problem comes. Otherwise, you know, we're a small industry. We know everyone, like how we are here in Dubai Watch Week. Max was with another brand. Today he has his own brand. So the talents are recycled. It's the really new people who know nothing about the industry where it could be a little bit challenging with them, especially if they don't have background information about the brand and how it's been functioning in other countries and who their partners are.
Let's just back up a little bit. You said 2 to tango. There's probably 3 to tango because the client is a very important part of the whole process. And the client's wishes can be satisfied in many different ways. Whether it's dealing directly as they do with myself on a small scale, the interaction is there. When you've got a massive scale and you're pushing out thousands, tens of thousands of units, it becomes irrespective. It's just how many can we sell in this particular region, and they don't take into consideration cultural differences, language differences. It's an area I know very little about, but I do understand it is an issue when you are talking about this relationship.
So Richard, you're in a kind of a unique position with respect to the rest of the panel in that you are basically your own control freak. You have a single shop, and Frodsham is a manufacturer that makes all of its own components. You basically control the entire experience of creating the watches from end to end, all the way out to people making an appointment, which I believe you have to do to come see Frodsham in the UK.
Correct, yes.
And so people visit you and you're kind of creating your own, well, not even creating your own retail environment. You're welcoming people into an environment that's been evolving organically for 185 years. Now, hypothetically, were you to think about expanding the distribution of the watches that you make to your very first retailer, you know, someplace other than your shop in the UK, your shop in London, what would you be concerned about in terms of protecting the image of the brand and helping people to understand what it is that makes your watches unique? Like, do you become a control freak at that point?
I think most brands like to have a uniformity about what it is that they are presenting, and they would hope that the distributors, the agents, and the retailers can take that on board. As I say, I have never experienced it, so I don't know. It's a learning curve for me. One day, it may or may not happen. For the moment, I enjoy the process of allowing a client an experience of enjoying a single product. I don't have a great number of products to offer, so it is, if that person is willing to invest their time, effort, and money into what I make as an artisan, for me, that's fulfilling.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a good segue to sort of the next point that I wanted to ask the panelists about. Your companies, for instance, make watches at a huge, huge range of complications, prices, market segments, and presentations. Siddiqui is obviously responsible for handling an equally enormous, even wider range of products, ranging from relatively utilitarian, mass-produced, high-quality watches, all the way up to unique pieces that are essentially miniature works of art. And Max, in your work, you have created, although yours is a very artisanal approach to watchmaking, you've also created watches that exist across a fairly wide range of price points. I think wider than perhaps many people might suspect. To what extent does the type of product determine the degree to which a brand needs to be in control of messaging? So for Freak, for instance, you don't necessarily have the same perspective that you would for a dive watch.
Yeah, that's correct. And probably the more, in theory, the more volume you sell, and the more standardized you want the experience to be. That's in theory. Having said that, I mean, for brands like, for instance, Ulysse Nardin or Girard-Perregaux, where we have an entry price, the multiple between the entry price and the highest price point is massive. And still, the brands remain quite exclusive in both their distribution and their volume. I think we don't differentiate much in terms of image, and I think it's still one brand, and it's still one DNA, one story. So in our case, it's not really a too different approach to that enforcement in the way we work and implement our communication, our merchandising, etc. But it's true for some other brands that are very high volume. It definitely should be a different experience. I want to add something. I think the conversation we're having now is probably also the consequence of some brands going full retail by themselves in the watch industry. Because suddenly, apart from Cartier, but suddenly some brands were forced to go into the merchandising, were forced to just have one type of approach, whether it's their own store or some partner store. I think when you work with partner, you have a highest level of flexibility, and I think that's personally, I believe it's a more modern approach. That's why I have a very strong faith in the future of multi-brand, if it's done in a proper way and with the right mindset.
Well, then, to Max's point about how things have changed over the last 30 years, historically, this was not something that the brands were good at. I mean, selling directly to...
It's true that there was a certain level of frustration as a creator of a brand, I'm talking 25, 30 years ago, that it went through a certain level of filters and that the end consumer didn't get the message. I think that was the first thinking. So they first went on to marketing, so like, we have to take care of the marketing, then the distributors disappeared, and there was also, of course, a level of margin. So how am I going to get that margin? And of course, let's not forget that 28 years ago when I came into this, there were no groups. There were no publicly owned companies. Now, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I mean, everybody was a family-owned company. So this growth, this very extensive growth, has pushed as we have to get control of the client. We have to get control of the narrative. A few retail partners have not been very good at giving the message. A few have also been preferring another brand. It's like, oh, you're not giving enough emphasis to my brand. I remember about 15, 20 years ago when the brands started coming in and wanting corners. Before that, there were no corners. I mean, a retailer would have maybe the display material. And then one brand started, it's a bit like the Adam and Eve story. One brand started a corner, and then the other guys go, my God, I need a corner. And then it was ego-driven. It was not business-driven. It was like, this CEO thought, oh my God, I go around, I needed a corner. And
this is the original sin of the control freak.
Exactly.
And
so that went on. And then we need our own boutique. I remember when I left Jaeger 20 years ago, I put a list of recommendations for my directors, I think what we should do. And one of them is we should create Jaeger boutiques. and everybody laughed. Everybody's like, go to Harry Winston.
In retrospect.
It was amazing when you see it afterwards. It was not because it was control. I just thought, we've got so much passion. How do we get it to the end consumer? I think for me, it all boils down to one thing, is the quality of the staff. And I'm not talking marketing, I'm talking sales. Some brands do such marketing that you don't need such a great staff. I had, probably shouldn't be telling this, but I always do put my foot in my mouth in these things.
Go on.
I hired an incredibly talented new sales director a year and a half ago. He came from one of the big brands, one of the big groups. And he was head of training. And so he came in, and of course, the first thing he says, we're going to improve everything thanks to all the training. He's really good at it. And after a year, he sat down with me, and he looked at me and said, look, I was wrong. Training is not what we should be doing. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, look, at the brand I was working for, 80% of the training of the staff was done by the massive marketing, and my job was only doing the last 20%, the last mile, how to more or less close the deal. With MB&F, we have to start from scratch. We have to find people who actually can tell the story, get people inspired, understand what independent watchmaking is about, how is it different from mainstream watchmaking, what is a hand finishing compared to industrial finishing. And he said, honestly, I've gone around the world, they're not even 10% of the sales staff in your 25 stores who actually can do that. So why are we spending so much time and energy? Now, I think some big brands started thinking that way and going, I'll just get my own staff, I'll hammer whatever he has to say and put him out there. That's the control.
And there are obviously, I mean, I can certainly conceive of situations where, you have a sales team, trained at HQ, coming fresh to HQ, and coming into a market that's as diverse, for example, as the one that the Siddiqui family operates in, and having it be a complete disaster.
It happens sometimes, but we also, even with training, we always like to see what they're going to say and how they're going to do it. Honestly, sometimes half of the time, I'm going to be very honest, salespeople sleep during the training. And I'm like, what's the point, guys? They're sleeping. They're not even listening to you. We must do it on ground. We must do it, together on ground. And this is one thing we're seeing proving very successful with Watchbox, for example. It's a new concept. It's a new JV. It's a different way of selling. And the entire team from the US are here. But they didn't call us all into a conference room and close the door and said, guys, this is the way we do it. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. I ticked the box. I trained. And now it's all on you. They are active. They're sitting there. They're showing people how things are done. When you see things, and not read it through a presentation, it has a stronger impact than, okay, let's go to the room and talk about how we do it. So even with that, the brands need to be more creative. You need to have passionate trainers. You need to have passionate representatives who come and transmit the message and not just sit there and go through, 80-page PowerPoint slide or something like that. I'm telling you, half of the time, the salespeople are sleeping.
And if I may,
Sorry,
a lot of brands want the uniformization, do you say, formization? I went into a store a couple of years ago. My mother wanted me to buy a pen for my cousin, and there was the ceremony of sales. Clearly the sales staff had been told, this is what you have to do. I didn't have time. I was on a thing. So I came in and said, okay, what's this, what's that? Okay, thank you very much. Can you make a gift wrap? I'm going to be leaving. And then the lady looks at me and says, would you like a coffee? No, could you please quickly
She probably
make
thought you're a mystery shopper, which is...
Probably. And that doesn't help. Would you like a glass of water? No, could you please gift wrap it? So she takes me to the till finally, and then she gives me an A4 page of questions. Know your client. I'm like, sorry? No, you have to do that, please. I'm like, well, then I'm not buying that pen. And they're like, okay, well, then you can off. But the KPIs which are given in these stores is key performance indicators. You have to take as many numbers as possible. You have to give, the ceremony has to be like that. I think it's human empathy. We heard the word empathy before. If you see a guy who doesn't have time, act as it. If you've got a person who wants to spend half an hour with you, do that. But everybody's got this sort of template And that's not going to help anybody.
Right, right. I mean, it sounds to me, based on the conversation that the four of you are having here, that it's understandable on the one hand for a control freak to be a control freak. It's understandable for brands to want to be in charge of their messaging and to want to have some degree of uniformity in practices across different markets, because that's in part key to the perception of the brand as a whole. Going back to what we were talking about with the freak versus selling a dive watch, and your comment that you want people to see these products on a narrative continuity, so to speak. But sometimes, to your point, it's a square peg in a round hole.
No, I think they're different sorts of clients. They're geeks like me, who I want to know all about the thing, and I'm ready to spend an hour mostly on talking about a watch with somebody who's as geekish as me. And there are people who just don't care. If you start explaining to them the Breguet spiral curve, their eyes glaze over. So you just have to.
Your entire company is based on that.
I'm with him.
You're selling on the strength of an exotic escapement.
So at the end of the day, retailers probably should have a genius bar like the Apple Store. It's like, if you're a geek, go there.
Right.
If you don't care, go there.
Have a sign: geeks this way, non-geeks this way.
Hence the idea of having a watch or a vending machine that you wanted to establish. For the guys that don't care, vending machine would be enough.
It's called e-commerce.
Yeah. But it's interesting, because when you look back, for instance, in the hospitality business, and when we're talking about the relationship between the end consumer and the salesperson, the hospitality business went through this some time ago. You remember at the time when you would go to a luxury hotel, and they had like a list of questions they would ask you. And I once bent over the counter of one of those luxury hotels, and there was a list, say, establish eye contact, 1. Smile, 2. 3, say good morning. Say, how can I help you, was number 4. So, and we all went through this painful process, and it's been done in different industries. And then I think now we passed that. Now we all know, whether it's through our own training, through also training of the staff in store, that we need to provide tools for a proper education, but then go one step beyond, and at the end of the day, when everyone is trained, has been formatted, you can set them free again and enable them to use their brain and to be smart. And that's where I think the culture of the retailer in general, to enable people to develop and grow their staff, or the overall mindset also of the brand, makes the difference, which is a tough thing to do.
It's very tough, especially here in the Middle East, for example. It's very difficult for us to find good sales staff who understand luxury or understand watches. So you can't keep them in a room and train them and say luxury is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We need to let them experience what luxury is. Take them to an experience where they would feel, oh, okay, now I understand why people enjoy going to a spa. Now I understand why people enjoy staying in a 5-star hotel rather than a 3-star hotel, because I experienced luxury. You cannot teach people these things. They need to feel it, and when they feel it, they know how to mirror it. I mean, we've been training from here on Dubai Watch Week. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but even our security guards have been trained, to say hello, to direct people. They know everything that's going on.
They are the most cordial security guards I've ever
Aren't they? And they're having so much fun, because they're always told, you're a security guard, just stand straight, and all you have to do is just make sure no one is doing something wrong. And we were like, guys, we don't want you to just be security guards. We want you to enjoy the event. They're moving from one location to the other. They're not standing in the same place, and they're welcoming people, and they feel like they're involved because they're talking to the guests rather than like standing there like a stat. So it does make a difference, but you'll have to allow them to test it. They need to try it. They need to feel it. And I'm sure that this group of people who we've trained, when they'll go to the next event, they're going to deliver even a better experience because they saw the results. And today we celebrated one of them. We were giving them vouchers. Whenever we see you doing something right, we're going to give you tickets. And at the end of the day, at the end of the 5 days, we're going to count how many tickets you have. And the one who has the most, ticket is going to win an iPhone 11. What is an iPhone? It doesn't cost anything, but they're so happy that they want that, and it connects them. So it's very important. Yes, and it's important to bring that human factor to these things, to trainings and everything. We are humans at the end of the day, so it's important to do that.
So we have a few minutes left before we open up to comments or questions from the audience. The one thing that I feel is this was not on the official list of questions, but I want to throw it out there really quickly anyway. Succeeding at really being a control freak presumes that you have control of the channels through which you're communicating, and of course, now we have this thing called the internet, which was not around 30 years ago. And I remember many, many years ago reading an interview with Gunter Blumlein, where he said, this was the very beginning of the watch internet, Purists and Time Zone had just appeared, and he said, you know, I don't have a computer on my desk, but every once in a while, if I hear there's an interesting article on one of the forums, I have my secretary print it out. And we have moved very, very far from that. So to what extent is it realistic to even, I mean, this is something that we all have to cope with, right? Because now we have, you know, I've talked to enthusiasts here who are from the Emirates, but they're talking to a guy in Central Europe, who's talking to a guy in London, who's talking to a guy in New York, Los Angeles, you know, Samoa, and I mean, everybody's part of this global conversation right now, and there is no controlling it.
Mm-hmm. At all. I mean, you put a post on social media and you can't control the comments that's going to come out of it, you know. And if you delete it, you know, they'll send you another email saying you deleted my comment, you know, where's the answer? So you can't control these things, but you have to be prepared and you have to be consistent and you have to be genuine with what you do and what you say. And if you're covering all of that, it's okay, you're safe. And we can't control people or our clients, you know, and tell them, no, you can't go buy from X person, or when you travel, you can't buy. But we have to offer them the service and, you know, the products that they like, and that's when they come back. But you can't be controlling if you're not, if you want to be out there in today's world.
I was the ultimate control freak until I had children. So at some point you learn that, let it go. It's not going to happen. Yeah. So you do as much as you can and do it with integrity, as you said. Do it
Absolutely.
Genuinely. And people will resonate or not, and just assume the consequence.
Yeah. Integrity, transparency, the bloggers, the vloggers, the journalists, the commentators, they will always say what they want to say. But if they're fed the right information, if you plant the right flower, the bees will come and the honey will be made.
Oof.
There you go.
That's the hope. That's the hope.
Cannot add anything. I cannot be better than that.
All right. Well, we're at the we've come now to the time when we ask you to ask these folks any questions that you might have.
Hello. This question is for Hind. You mentioned how, you know, a brand would have a certain idea, and you said no, that's not going to work. If possible, can you share an idea that a brand had, and you said, and what was that idea, and why, you know, was it not a good idea?
Okay. In this region, we have issues with influencers and the use of influencers. And I just don't understand how a team of non-speaking, you know, non-Arabic speakers choose an Arabic influencer just because they like the pictures in their feed and the number of followers that's on the page. But then when you open so influencers, I don't like to call them that. I hope they're not influencing anyone. Not all. There are a few that we respect. And then you read the comments that are under the picture. You'd think they're talking about the product that they're showcasing. Half of it is advertising from other people, you know, saying, oh, come to my account. And then the other half is either they're swearing at her because they don't like her in Arabic, or him, and maybe no comment about the product, okay? And why are you doing that? And you're offending our clients. Our clients are calling us and saying, if this person is wearing this watch, I don't want it. So we try to explain this, guys, what are you doing? They're not real, they're fake. And stop spending your money on them and stop giving them products that they don't even know, don't appreciate. I'm telling you, I've seen influencers where the brands have given them a gift. I swear, the next time we see her, her personal assistant is wearing it and it's not her who's wearing it. Is that the type of person you want to associate yourself with? And why don't you trust us when we tell you this doesn't work? There are few that are amazing and we can highlight them, But then there are others that you should just avoid. Why are you making them bigger than they are? And that's the biggest problem I have.
Given that you guys are CEOs and at the helm of your companies, do you miss wearing other watches out in public? Do you feel that there's pressure from the public? I mean, the CEO of Apple wouldn't want to be caught dead, with an Android phone. What is it like in the watch industry?
No, Max told me this morning he would dream to wear a Freak from time to time, but I was not supposed to talk about it. And maybe one day I would maybe wearing an MB&F. Personally, no, not at all, to be honest. And I think I'm fortunate, I'm not the owner of the company, but I'm fortunate to run two companies that have products that are extremely inspiring and exciting. And many of them designed before I joined the company. So for me, it's not an issue at all.
Just to answer, I love watches. I'm of that category where my wife rolls her eyes going, not another watch. And of course, not mine. It's true that there are public moments where it's better if you're wearing your own. But all the rest of the time, all the downtime, I actually more or less never wear one of my pieces. So that's much more than the rest of the time.
In your opening statement, you mentioned that brands, and you mentioned Patek and Rolex, treat you as a partner. What unifies those two brands is that they're both privately owned. They don't have shareholders. Do you get different pressures from companies which are publicly traded and have to worry about quarterly results than you do from the privately owned companies?
We don't have the pressure, but I'm sure they have the pressure. Publicly owned brands, with companies that are publicly, I'm sure they have a pressure of, asking them at the end of the year, how much have you made and what did you do in certain markets? But each brand, they work differently. There are brands within groups that have more freedom than another brand within the same group, and it's probably because of the way the brand has positioned themselves. So it's not the same with all the brands within the group. Some of them actually have more freedom than the others. I don't know how internally that is determined, but it's not always the case that it's more difficult with the brands that are owned by big groups.
If I may, I think what's interesting when you look at the successful brands today in the market, and we all know them, the level of consistency over time is massive. And most of those brands are independent. Obviously, we belong to a public group, but some public group have a more long-term view than others. But for sure, I think it's quite inspiring to see in that industry that the consistency and that ability to sail through the tough time with the same demanding approach of the business is rewarded.
How do you respond sometimes when brands or their representatives, as most likely is the case, try and control the way that you interact with your audience, your readers, whom you know and have developed that rapport and relationship with, and sometimes in a way that, and you might like to tell the story or develop a narrative of your own that's not necessarily on message, not in a negative way, just not completely in line with the marketing direction that brands are pushing. How do you respond to that, especially since we all know here that most of the time you're the most knowledgeable person about the product, even more than the brand representative you might be interacting with?
Yeah, it's an interesting problem. I mean, from a journalist's perspective, there's any kind of consumer journalism involves maintaining good diplomatic relationships with the companies that you cover. Otherwise, it's access journalism. There's no opportunity to see the products if you don't have some degree of cordiality with the brands that you cover. And just speaking personally, for me, it's always been relatively easy because I actually love watches. I came to this. I didn't graduate from journalism school and say to myself, well, let's see, covering politics or covering watches? Do I want to be on the city crime desk, or do I want to write about Patek Philippe? I kind of fell into it. So I come at it as I see products from companies as diverse as you can possibly imagine, just as you have. I mean, I remember discovering Max's work for the first time and saying to myself, wow, it's really incredible just how diverse watchmaking can be, watch design can be. You know, we have companies like Frodsham, you know, whose entire, you know, their whole selling point is the use of this really, really obscure escapement that is one of the most intellectually beautiful things that has ever occurred in watchmaking, but it's hard to get people to understand that. So I usually don't find it to be a problem, you know. I mean, every once in a while I'll have a brand ask me to cover something that I think our audience, the Hodinkee audience, is going to respond poorly to. And, you know, they respond instantly and acrimoniously if they feel like, you know, sort of a product is not for them. But, you know, by and large, you know, the subject of trust came up earlier, and with, you know, as a journalist or as a retailer or as a distributor, if the brand actually knows that you have, if they trust that you not have their best interests at heart, but that you're trying to see what they do well and to present that to your readers, then I think they will understand if, you know, if you say, you know, I don't think this product is necessarily for us, but good luck. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.